£2,000 a month doesn't sound real until it's your life. Until you're standing in a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, looking at a rent reminder that's bigger than your entire old paycheck used to be. Until you realize half your income disappears before you've even bought food. This is normal now. Not for luxury flats, not for penthouses, for ordinary homes. People with full-time jobs are paying £2,000 just to exist indoors. And the scariest part isn't that it's expensive, it's that people are starting to accept it. You hear it in how they talk. Well, that's just London. That's just how things are now. At least I've got a place. That shift in language matters, because when £2,000 rent becomes normal, something has already gone very wrong. People aren't choosing this. They're adapting to it. They're sharing longer. They're moving further out. They're cutting back on everything else. They're paying more for less space, less security, and less peace of mind. And they're doing it quietly. No protests. No panic, just people reshaping their lives around a number they never planned for. Think about what £2,000 a month actually means. It means saving becomes almost impossible. It means one job change can wreck you. It means starting a family feels reckless. It means your life is built on a tightrope. And yet, this isn't happening to a small group. It's happening to nurses, to teachers, to office workers, to couples doing everything right. People who thought hard work would be enough. But now, even stability has a price tag that keeps rising. Another quiet change is how temporary everything feels. People don't decorate anymore. They don't settle. They don't plan beyond the next renewal. Because when rent is that high, your home doesn't feel like home. It feels like a bill. And the pressure doesn't stop at the front door. £2,000 rent pushes people further from work. It eats into health. It shapes friendships. It decides where you can live, who you can live near, and how long you can stay. This isn't about splurging, it's about survival. The most dangerous part is that this didn't arrive overnight. Rents crept up slowly, people adjusted, then adjusted again, until suddenly, £2,000 didn't feel shocking. It felt inevitable, and when something feels inevitable, people stop questioning it. But this didn't happen by accident. £2,000 rent isn't the result of one bad year or one greedy landlord. It's the result of years of decisions stacking on top of each other. Decisions about housing, about planning, about who gets protected and who absorbs pressure. This video is about how £2,000 rent became normal in the UK, not just what it costs, but what it's doing to people's lives, and why pretending this is sustainable is the most dangerous thing of all. Because once a country normalizes this level of pressure, it doesn't just change housing. It changes everything. When people hear £2,000 rent, they often picture a choice, a nice building, a central location, something extra. But for a growing number of people in the UK, £2,000 isn't a choice. It's the entry price. This video isn't about a few extreme cases or headline-grabbing listings. It's about how a number that once sounded outrageous quietly became standard and why that matters far beyond housing. Because when rent reaches this level, it stops being just a housing issue. It becomes a life issue. It shapes how people work, how they plan, how they feel about the future. And most importantly, it changes who gets to stay. One of the reasons this shift went unnoticed is because it didn't arrive with drama. There was no single jump. Rents climbed in steps. People adjusted, then adjusted again. At each stage, it felt survivable. Until suddenly, it wasn't. Now, £2,000 rent shows up in places it never used to. Not just in central London, not just in luxury blocks, but in ordinary neighbourhoods, in commuter towns, in cities across the UK. That tells us something deeper is happening. This video will break down how we got here, starting with the real impact on everyday life, then pulling back to show the structural forces that pushed rents this high. We'll look at why wages didn't keep up, why supply didn't respond, and why renting absorbed the pressure instead of fixing it. We'll also talk about who benefits from this system, who pays the price, and why this level of rent is changing the shape of British cities. Because £2,000 rent doesn't just change budgets. It changes behaviour. People delay moving, they delay relationships, they delay families, they accept insecurity as normal. That acceptance is the real danger. By the end of this video, you'll understand why £2,000 rent didn't happen by accident and why ignoring it isn't neutral. Because when a country treats this level of pressure as normal, it's making a choice about what kind of future it's willing to accept. And once that future sets in, it's very hard to undo. Let's break down how this became reality. When rent hits £2,000 a month, life stops being flexible. That's the first thing people notice. Not right away, not in one big moment, but slowly, as options disappear. At first, people tell themselves it's manageable. They run the numbers again. They cut back a bit. They tell themselves it's temporary. But £2,000 rent doesn't just take money, takes margin. And without margin, life gets tight very fast. People with full-time jobs start living month to month. Not because they're bad with money, not because they overspend, because rent eats everything first. After rent, there's food, transport, bills, and whatever's left is thin. Saving becomes something you talk about, not something you do. People stop building buffers. That's dangerous, because once savings stop growing, one small shock can knock everything over. A job change, an illness, a rent increase. That's how people end up trapped. Another thing £2,000 rent does is turn working harder into a dead end. In the past, earning more helped. Now, higher pay often just keeps you afloat. People take promotions only to feel poorer. They earn more but save less. That messes with motivation. When effort doesn't lead to security, people burn out. Another reality is sharing far longer than planned. People in their 30s and 40s sharing with strangers. Couples sharing with other couples. Not for fun, not to save aggressively, but because living alone is no longer realistic. That erodes privacy. And privacy matters. It affects relationships, mental health, sense of adulthood. People don't talk about this openly, but it weighs on them. Another effect is how temporary life feels. When rent is that high, people don't settle. They don't decorate. They don't invest emotionally. They don't plan long term. Homes feel provisional, like you're just passing through, even after years. That constant sense of this could end any time is exhausting. Another reality is fear. Fear of renewal time. Fear of emails from landlords. Fear of listings disappearing. People live with a low-level anxiety that never switches off. That stress shapes behavior. People avoid complaining about repairs. They avoid rocking the boat, because finding another place at £2,000 or more feels impossible. That power imbalance is real. Another thing £2,000 rent does is push people further out. Longer commutes, more time lost. People trade hours of their life for affordability. 2-hour daily commutes become normal. That time doesn't disappear. It comes out of sleep, out of relationships, out of health. People are tired all the time, and they don't always know why. Another effect is on family life. People delay having children, not because they don't want them, because raising a child in insecure, expensive housing feels reckless. Families squeeze into places that don't fit. Kids grow up without space. Parents live with constant worry. That stress doesn't show up on rent listings, but it's real. Another reality is how often people move. Rent increases force moves. Landlords sell. Contracts end. Moving is expensive. Deposits, fees, time off work. People lose stability again and again. That constant reset wears people down. Another effect is how friendships change. People drift apart. Friends move further away. Social circles shrink. Cities feel less connected. This isn't cultural change. It's displacement. Another reality is how people talk about the future. They don't talk about buying. They talk about surviving the next increase. They don't plan 5 years ahead. They plan one lease ahead. That short-term thinking isn't a personality trait. It's a response to pressure. Another effect is resentment. Not always loud. Often quiet. People feel they did what they were told. They studied. They worked. They avoided debt. And still, £2,000 rent eats their life. That resentment doesn't disappear. It sits there. Another reality is inequality becoming visible. Two people earning the same live very different lives. One has family help. One doesn't. One saves. One can't. Housing turns background advantage into destiny. That's corrosive. Another effect is how people relate to work. Work becomes about paying rent, not building a life. That drains meaning. Another reality is the emotional toll. People feel stuck, not trapped by one bad decision, but by a system that doesn't offer exits. That feeling leads to anxiety, depression, burnout. Health services feel it later. Another effect is people leaving. Leaving cities, leaving regions, leaving the country, not for adventure, for affordability. That's a loss Britain doesn't measure properly. Another reality is adaptation. People adapt so well that the crisis looks invisible. They cope, they adjust, they normalize. But adaptation isn't healing, it's endurance. And endurance has limits. £2,000 rent doesn't just change housing. It reshapes adulthood. It delays milestones. It narrows options. It drains energy. And when this becomes normal for millions, it stops being a personal problem. It becomes a social one. This is the ground-level reality. Not headlines. Not averages. Daily life under £2,000 rent. And once you see this clearly, the next question becomes unavoidable. How did this become normal in the first place, and who decided this level of pressure was acceptable? £2,000 rent didn't become normal because people suddenly wanted nicer homes. It became normal because pressure built up for years with nowhere to go, and when pressure has no release, it doesn't disappear. It concentrates. The first and biggest reason £2,000 rent became normal is simple: Britain didn't build enough homes. Not for a few years. For decades. Population grew, cities expanded, jobs clustered in certain places. Housing supply didn't keep up. Every year Britain failed to build enough homes. The gap widened. That gap didn't reset. It stacked. At first, the shortage showed up as higher prices in the most popular areas. The second reason is where homes were lost. Britain used to have a large stock of council housing. Secure, affordable, long-term. That housing acted as a pressure valve. When private rents rose too fast, people had alternatives. Then those homes were sold off. Millions of them. And crucially, they weren't replaced. This didn't feel like a crisis at the time. Home ownership rose. People felt wealthier. But the long-term effect was devastating. The safety net disappeared. All the pressure moved into the private market. And private renting was never designed to carry that load. The third reason is planning. Britain's planning system makes building slow, uncertain, and politically risky. Local opposition can block projects for years. Approvals take time. Costs rise before building even starts. So even when demand is obvious, supply doesn't respond fast enough. Markets don't work when supply is locked behind barriers. Instead of new homes appearing, rents rise. The fourth reason is geography. Jobs concentrate faster than housing. Cities grow quickly. Homes don't. When work pulls people into certain areas and homes don't follow, competition explodes. That competition shows up in rent. The fifth reason is how housing became an investment. Over time, homes stopped being treated mainly as places to live. They became assets, sources of income, pensions, stores of wealth. That changed incentives. Scarcity became valuable. High rents became acceptable. Rising prices were celebrated. Policies followed that logic. Anything that threatened prices became politically sensitive, so supply stayed tight. The sixth reason is interest rates. For years, low rates made high rents survivable. Landlords borrowed cheaply. Tenants stretched further. Low rates hid the shortage. They delayed the pain. When rates rose, landlords passed costs on. Renters absorbed the shock because they had no choice. The seventh reason is wages. Wages didn't keep up. Even as productivity grew, pay lagged. So rents rose faster than incomes. That gap widened quietly. Until £2,000 rent wasn't shocking. It was necessary. The eighth reason is how renting works. Short contracts. Easy increases. Weak security. That system shifts power toward landlords when supply is tight. Renters compete. Landlords set terms. This isn't about good or bad people. It's about incentives. The ninth reason is migration pressure. More people need homes. But housing didn't scale. Competition increased. Prices followed. The 10th reason is how people adapted. They shared more. They lived smaller. They commuted further. That adaptation hid the crisis. From the outside, things looked functional. From the inside, people were stretched thin. Politicians mistook coping for success. The 11th reason is that high rents didn't reduce demand. People can't opt out of shelter. So even as rents rose, demand stayed high. Markets didn't correct. They hardened. The 12th reason is that building affordable homes became harder. Land costs rose. Regulations increased. Profit margins shrank. Developers focused on higher-end units. Affordable supply lagged. The 13th reason is delay. Every year the problem was acknowledged but not solved. Short-term fixes replaced long-term plans. Delay made £2,000 rent feel inevitable. The 14th reason is expectation. Once people expect rents to be high, behavior changes. Landlords price higher. Renters brace themselves. High rents normalize. The 15th reason is fragmentation. No single body is responsible for fixing the shortage. Central government sets targets. Local councils manage planning. Private developers build for profit. Responsibility is spread thin. Urgency fades. The 16th reason is that housing policy avoided pain. Building homes upsets voters. Lowering prices angers owners. So governments chose the least risky path, which was doing too little. The 17th reason is that £2,000 rent crept in quietly. Not overnight. In increments. £1,200 became £1,400. £1,400 became £1,600. £1,600 became £2,000. At each step, people adjusted. By the time it reached £2,000, resistance was exhausted. The 18th reason is that renting became permanent for many. What was meant to be temporary became long-term. The system never adapted, so pressure kept rising. The 19th reason is that public debate lagged reality. Statistics arrived late. Policy moved slowly. By the time £2,000 rent was openly discussed, it was already widespread. The 20th and most important reason is this. £2,000 rent became normal because Britain treated housing like a market problem instead of a supply problem. Markets don't fix shortages when supply is constrained. They raise prices. And when prices rise in a system with weak renter protections, renters absorb the damage. This isn't a mystery. It's a predictable outcome. And now that £2,000 rent is normal, the question isn't whether it's fair. It's what happens next. Because systems don't stop where they are. They keep moving in the same direction. And if nothing changes, £2,000 won't be the ceiling. It'll be the baseline. Which brings us to the most important part of this story. Why renting absorbed this pressure instead of breaking, and why that means this problem is far from over. When rents climb this high, people expect something to snap. A crash, a correction, a mass refusal to pay. But that didn't happen. Instead, renting absorbed the pressure. It bent, stretched, and reshaped people's lives without fully breaking, and that's exactly why the crisis deepened. The first reason renting absorbed the pressure is simple: people cannot opt out. You can stop buying luxury items, you can cut holidays, you can cancel subscriptions, and you cannot cancel shelter. No matter how high rent goes, people still need somewhere to live. That makes renting different from almost every other market. Demand doesn't fall when prices rise, it just becomes more desperate. The second reason is that renting is fragmented. Renters experience pressure individually, not collectively. One household struggles, another adjusts, and another moves. There's no single moment where everyone feels it at once. That fragmentation prevents sudden backlash. People cope alone, and coping hides crisis. The third reason is contracts. Short-term contracts keep renters in a constant state of renewal. Every year or two, people reassess and they don't revolt. They renegotiate their lives, they move further out, they downsize, and they share. That rolling adjustment spreads pain over time. The fourth reason is fear. Fear of losing a home is powerful. People don't push back hard when alternatives are worse. They accept increases and they stay quiet about repairs. They avoid conflict. That fear transfers power upward. The fifth reason is that moving is expensive: deposits, fees, and time off work. Even when rent becomes unaffordable, leaving is costly. So people stay longer than they should. That delays visible failure. The sixth reason is adaptability. People are incredibly adaptable. They lower expectations, they redefine normal, and they accept less space, less privacy, less security. That adaptation looks like resilience, but it's actually absorption. The seventh reason is stigma. Struggling with rent feels like personal failure. People don't announce it and they don't organize around it. They hide it. That silence keeps pressure invisible. The eighth reason is that renting expanded to include people with stable incomes. This wasn't just students anymore. It was professionals, families, and older adults. People with jobs adapted rather than protested. They tightened belts and they absorbed shock. The ninth reason is delayed consequences. Rent stress doesn't explode, it accumulates. Savings drain slowly and stress builds quietly. By the time people hit breaking points, they're isolated. The 10th reason is that renting became permanent. What was meant to be temporary became long-term, so people stopped expecting escape, they adjusted expectations downward. That psychological shift matters. When people stop expecting better, pressure stabilizes at a higher level. The 11th reason is weak protections. Rent increases are easy and security is low. That structure encourages absorption, not resistance. The 12th reason is that alternatives disappeared. Social housing shrank and affordable ownership vanished. There was nowhere else to go. Pressure had nowhere to spill except into renters' lives. The 13th reason is that landlords could pass costs on. Interest rates rose and costs increased. Landlords raised rents and renters absorbed it. The 14th reason is timing. Increases came in steps, not shocks, and each step felt survivable, until the total became overwhelming. The 15th reason is culture. Britain normalized high housing costs and people were told it was just how it is. That narrative softened resistance. The 16th reason is that renting didn't break because people broke first. They cut back, they delayed plans, and they accepted insecurity. Systems survive by transferring pain downward. That's what happened here. The 17th reason is that markets misread adaptation. Because people paid, the system assumed affordability. But paying isn't the same as thriving. The 18th reason is that the pain wasn't evenly distributed. Some struggled more than others. That unevenness prevented a single breaking point. The 19th reason is hope. People believed it was temporary. That hope kept them compliant. The 20th and most important reason is this: renting absorbed the pressure because it was designed to. Short-term contracts, weak protections, and fragmented tenants. The system pushes stress onto individuals and individuals absorb until they can't. That's why £2,000 rent didn't cause immediate collapse. But absorption isn't stability. It's strain, and strain always leads somewhere. Which brings us to the final question: what happens if this level of rent becomes permanent? Because when pressure is absorbed long enough, it doesn't disappear. It reshapes the future, and the future shaped by £2,000 rent is not one most people are prepared for. If £2,000 rent becomes permanent, the damage doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in, quietly, slowly, and everywhere. That's what makes this moment so dangerous, because permanence changes behavior. When people believe high rent is temporary, they cope. When they believe it's permanent, they adapt their lives around it, and that adaptation reshapes a country. The first consequence is that stability becomes a privilege, not an expectation. Housing stops being something you build a life on, it becomes something you survive around, and people stop assuming effort leads to security. They work, but they don't feel safe. They earn, but they don't build, and that breaks the link between hard work and progress. Once that link breaks, trust erodes. The second consequence is that cities hollow out in slow motion. Not through collapse. Through exit. People who keep cities running leave first: teachers, nurses, care workers, and public servants. They don't leave because they want to, they leave because £2,000 rent leaves no room for error. Cities keep their wealth and they lose their backbone. And once that happens, quality of life drops for everyone. The third consequence is that family life gets postponed indefinitely. People delay children longer than planned, they delay settling down, and they delay putting down roots. Not because they don't want those things, but because housing makes them feel reckless for wanting them. That shows up later in falling birth rates, aging populations, and shrinking communities. Those trends don't reverse easily. The fourth consequence is that inequality hardens into structure. Housing becomes the main dividing line. Those who locked in earlier build wealth and stability, and those who didn't are locked into permanent insecurity. Two people earning the same live completely different lives. That gap widens every year. And once inequality becomes structural, mobility stalls. The fifth consequence is mental exhaustion becoming normal. Living under constant housing pressure drains people. The fear of renewal, the fear of increases, the fear of being forced to move. That stress never fully switches off. People burn out quietly. Health systems feel it later. The sixth consequence is that ambition shrinks. People stop taking risks, they avoid career moves, they avoid starting businesses, and they avoid changing cities. Housing pressure makes people cautious. Cautious societies don't grow. And they stagnate. The seventh consequence is that housing starts shaping politics in unhealthy ways. When people feel trapped, frustration builds. Not always loudly, often quietly. People disengage, they stop believing promises, and they stop trusting institutions. That erosion lasts longer than any housing cycle. The eighth consequence is that emergency solutions become permanent. Temporary accommodation expands, and short-term fixes replace long-term planning. Costs rise and problems deepen. The ninth consequence is that Britain becomes less competitive. Talented people leave not because they hate the country, but because they can't build stable lives in it. That loss compounds over time. The 10th and most important consequence is this: £2,000 rent changes how people see the future. When housing feels hostile, the future feels fragile. People stop imagining better lives, they focus on endurance, and societies built on endurance instead of hope slowly shrink. This isn't about panic. It's about trajectory. If £2,000 rent becomes the baseline, it won't stay there. Baselines move. What feels shocking today becomes expected tomorrow. And once expectations reset upward, pulling them back down is incredibly hard. Britain didn't reach this point overnight. And it won't feel the full consequences overnight either. But the direction is clear. More pressure, less stability, and more adaptation. Until adaptation itself becomes the problem. This is the moment where countries either admit something fundamental has broken or accept a smaller, tighter, more unequal version of themselves. £2,000 rent isn't just a number. It's a signal. A signal that housing stopped supporting life and started controlling it. And the longer that signal is ignored, the more permanent its effects become. If you want to understand what this means for Britain's cities next, watch the next video on this channel.